plans or objectives because of the changes occurring in the world around him. So in drawing strengths in the past, one is obliged to think for oneself, to contemplate simply the characteristics that one found in the individual and the manner in which they approached a question, thus making it possible to approach our question in the same spirit, but doing it independently. And that is exactly what she does. She gathers all the information about the public sector unions. She weighs what they have to say. She looks at what employers and bosses are doing, and she comes to a conclusion solidly in support of the public sector unions. And we obviously can't say what would have happened, but I think that Franklin Roosevelt would have followed her in that rethinking of how the public sector should be protected. And I have to tell you, I got a call just a couple of weeks ago from a young girl in a middle school in Columbus, Ohio. And she and her friends were working on a play they were doing on Eleanor Roosevelt for a competition. And she had seen my book on the web and got my phone number. And they wanted to help the workers in Ohio and Wisconsin. And she said to me, she went into a coal mine, didn't she? Do you think she would support the workers today? And I was so touched because I'm from Ohio, and I am so outraged about what's going on there and about John Kasich calling the police officers idiots. I mean, not just taking away collective bargaining and a voice at work, but demeaning, the people that we depend on. So I gave them a very emphatic yes, Eleanor Roosevelt would be supporting teachers, nurses, police officers, and firefighters, and I did write a column on it. But she did debate the question. She did gather information. And finally, she said in her column, employees who are quite evidently not receiving a living wage and are dissatisfied with their conditions of work would simply be slaves if they were obliged to work on without being able to reach their employers with their complaints and to demand negotiation. When teachers went on strike in New York City in 1962, right shortly before she died, she wrote that there was no, quote, method of complaint and adjustment that could take the place of collective bargaining, with the ultimate possibility of a strike. Under the present setup, teachers have no other recourse but to strike to draw attention to their legitimate complaints. She believed that workers' rights are human rights, both public and private. The workers in Wisconsin and Ohio and other states are threatened by the loss of this very basic human right in the name of a fiscal crisis that they didn't create. This is not about money, as President Obama very clearly said. This is about unions. Eleanor Roosevelt firmly believes that democracy should include not only voting in government elections, but having a voice in decisions that affect our lives every day. When asked where, after all, do human rights begin, she answered in small places close to home: the neighborhood, the school, the factory, the farm, the office. Unless they have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. She also believed that every one of us could and should do what she was doing, close to home. Talk to your neighbors about working conditions. Write an article for the newspaper. Support an organizing campaign. Be active in politics. Come to the Pacific Democratic meeting on Saturday mornings. Join a union. She embraced new technologies, and I have no doubt at all that if Eleanor Roosevelt were alive today, she would be blogging and tweeting.
That's
have
right.
A Facebook page, and
yes.
she would have a web address.
Yes.
Today, only 7% of private sector workers belong to a labor union. Only 13% of workers overall. Workers are fired in a third of union organizing drives run by the National Labor Relations Board. And in almost 60% of union organizing drives, employers threaten to close the plants. And researchers at Cornell have well documented that intimidation and fear are increasing as tools used by employers against the workers. We have made great progress since 1936, and I think we have to acknowledge that, but we are going backwards in the world of labor relations. And then when you look around the world, in this year, March was the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where 146 mostly young immigrant women were killed when the doors were locked and they couldn't get out of the sweatshops in the building. And the fire ladders only went up 8 stories, and the workers were on stories 9 and 10. And they either burned or fell to their death. There were 2 very similar fires in Bangladesh last year. And workers, mostly young immigrant women, killed in the fires. Our employment policies and our labor laws are in need of change to bring the New Deal into the 21st century. They are not in need of elimination. They are in need of change. And to extend to far more workers than they do. Migrant workers are still not covered by any form of labor legislation, except in California. And we do have labor laws for migrant workers here. But in the rest of the country, they don't. And it's still quite legal for children to work in the farms, on the fields. And Eleanor testified twice on behalf of migrant workers, once as First Lady, and then again in 1958, A. Philip Randolph asked her to write columns and to be part of a committee that was investigating the migrant worker problems. And she also took her concerns about the migrant workers to the AFL-CIO convention in 1961, telling George Meany that he needed to continue his organizing drive. He was thinking about stopping it. She wasn't close to George Meany, but when Eleanor Roosevelt wrote to him or called him, he called back. And the AFL-CIO voted to continue their migrant organizing efforts. Not solely due to Eleanor Roosevelt, but it sure didn't hurt to have her on your side. I think her voice resonates today with the call for reform, not only to achieve economic gains, but to restore a basic element of democracy to women and men who work for a living. And as she told the delegates at the last CIO convention, we can't just talk, we have got to act. And so now, one of the things that I'm going to do after today is Barbara and I are going to get together and talk about 2012 and how our coastside Democrats in the southern part of the coast here can work with Pacifica Democrats in the upcoming campaign year that we're going to have. So we can't just talk, we've got to act. Thank you.
Bravo.